morning, and thank you for joining us for this week's service, whether you call Epicenter your church or it's your first time joining us. Today, we're down to the final sermon on our series on the book of Revelation. We will be focusing on Revelation chapter 21 and 22 and talk about a broken humanity restored. Whether you're new to the church or even if you just want to catch up on past sermons on this series, you can scan the QR code displayed on the screen on your mobile device that will direct you to our YouTube channel playlist for this series. If you don't have a mobile device, you can simply go to YouTube, find our channel, Wadena Epicenter, and click on the playlist to access the previous sermons from this series. As we go through this message, we want to encourage you to follow along with your Bibles and jot down some notes on your worship programs. If you have kids that are between the ages of 4 and 6th grade, we currently have Epicenter Kids taking place over in the kids wing, but your kids can join them at any time during the service. If you have newborns to 3-year-olds that would like some space to move around, we do have a parent room available, and you can view and listen to the message from there. If you'd like something to keep your kids busy during the service, we have sketch pads available in the info table for them to use throughout the service.
Of all the fears that grip our hearts, no fear is greater than the fear of death. There are those who will tell you that death is a natural part of life. But if death is just a part of life, then why does it cause us such anger and sorrow? When God created humanity, He intended for us to grow more and more beautiful over time. But in one tragic moment, we unleashed sin into the world, and everything broke, including our bodies. Death is the ultimate consequence of sin, and it fills God's heart with anger and sorrow even more than it does ours, because death was not a part of God's original plan. The Bible says that when Jesus approached the tomb of his friend Lazarus, he quaked with rage, and his eyes filled with tears. He was overwhelmed by the suffering caused by death, a curse we had brought upon ourselves. Death's curse was physical. Both the world and our bodies were decaying. But death's curse was also spiritual, eternally separating humanity from their Creator, the source of all light, love, and life. But because of God's amazing love, He chose to surrender all power and glory to rescue us from death. Jesus, God's only Son, was expelled from the presence of the Father and thrust into complete darkness in our place. He took humanity's curse upon Himself, breaking death's grip on us and purchasing humanity a place at the Father's side forever. A day is coming when the true King will return at last to restore the world to its full glory, and us with it, renewing both soul and body. Some will tell you not to fear death because it's part of life. But Jesus says not to fear death because it's been defeated. And the day will come when Jesus embraces you with his nail-scarred hands and says, "Welcome home."
After 26 weeks on our study on the book of Revelation, we are finally to the final installment of this sermon series. Now, as we have gone through every chapter and every topic, there are events that are described in the book of Revelation that are from different vantage points, and it's crescendoing into the whole purpose and the storyline of the Bible. The first book, Genesis, records origin, purpose, and the fall. The last book, Revelation, looks forward to future destiny, purpose restored, and humanity restored as a whole. The entire storyline of the Bible can easily be summarized with the last two books of the Bible in the book of Revelation, chapter 21 and chapter 22. Even though it's focusing on future events that are still to come. Every event that happens in these two chapters is reconciling the problems of the past and the current struggles of today. And that's what those two chapters are doing. As stated in the opening clip, and even as I was talking about during our prayer time, death is part of life. We experience it. It's difficult. But death was not part of the design. While we experience chaos and corruption on a daily basis, those things were not at the moment of origin. The book of Revelation unravels God's redemption plan and a future fulfillment, complete fulfillment. What we're seeing is a reversal of every negative aspect of life and society that we as individuals, or even as a society, we're trying to reverse and to stop. We're trying to figure out ways to stop pain and suffering. We're trying to figure out ways of pausing or stopping aging, death, and decay. Those are things that we desire. So in the previous chapter, Revelation chapter 20, verses 10 and 14, something was recorded that is significant, that is helping us to understand the extent of the damage that the fall caused and the sources of what really presents challenges and difficulties for us every single day. And these chapters are revealing that. They're helping us to understand these are the difficulties that you're experiencing. Revelation chapter 20, verse 10 stated this. I'm going backwards, but it's all playing a factor into how we're wrapping up the series. Verse 10 said, the devil who had deceived them, the nations, was thrown into the fiery lake of burning sulfur, joining the beast and the false prophet. There they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. So we're seeing the source of the issue. The devil who tricks, tempts, and deceives people is removed from the picture, right? He's cast out to the lake of fire. And along with him is the counterfeit trinity. We also learned in this book that the devil will be bound for a time, but this is no longer in a time frame only to be released later. He is eternally removed from the picture. There's no longer temptation, deception. There's no longer that deceiver that is part of the picture. Aside from the fact that at this point, the source of deception and temptation is removed, the devil is removed, everything is going to shift when we enter into our eternal body and state. Something's changing. It's completely different. The Bible continually reveals that in our broken condition, the flesh, which is our bodies, there's a natural bend and inclination to do what is sinful. Have you ever thought about this? That in our daily struggles, we often find ourselves wanting to do things that we know are not right, and we try to imagine how in heaven this could be removed. How is it possible for us to not desire to do the same things that we're struggling with right now? This is helping us to understand. We are entering into our eternal state. We are no longer in flesh and bone bodies, but 1 Corinthians chapter 15 states that our earthly bodies are planted into the ground. When we die, right, we're buried, but they will be raised to live forever. They're eternal bodies. It's a different type of body. And our eternal state is not the same as our current one. It's different. So the two things that significantly shift when we enter into our eternal state is not only our eternal composition, what we're made of, but our environment changes. The deceiver is removed. The source of deception and temptation that has deceived the nations and individuals to do ultimately what rebels against God is no longer there. A while back, my family and I actually went to explore the Duluth area. We've gone to Duluth many times, but we've never really explored it much. And we decided to just start exploring. As we started to explore, we saw this really neat bay area where there's this small little island removed from the mainland, but it's connected by jetties, by rock jetty. This place is called Pellet Island. And this is actually what it looks like from the satellite. It's really cool. It's a really neat little area. But this island is a little bit further away. There's a jetty that lead up to it. We decided to make a stop and make the little trek, which consists of rocks. It just looks like a nice little trail. It's not. It's actually really deceiving from the satellite photo. The rocks are huge, and you're having to jump and try to really do this trekking task. Now, this is an obstacle for adults, but it's simply difficult, if not impossible, for toddlers and infants to do, which we had 2 of. We now have 2 toddlers. At the time, we had 1 infant and 1 toddler. My wife decided to stay back with our infant, our daughter Addison, and I strapped my son Alistair to my back on a toddler backpack carrier. As we start going, my kids and I start to walk this trek, the obstacles that would have been easy otherwise become really difficult because I'm limited in my mobility, right? There's this backpack with a human being strapped behind me, and I'm trying to protect his life as I'm trying to get to the island. And not to mention that I have more weight. It got really hot really quick. And as we get to the island, you're at the base, and then there's this ladder that you climb up. And I'm thinking, I'm climbing up with a human being in a ladder that probably is going to break as I start to climb up it. And it's difficult. It's a difficult little trek. But it's hard when you're carrying weight that was not there. After we got done from exploring the island, I unstrapped the backpack from me, my son, and, at that moment I felt like ain't no mountain high enough. I just felt like I could keep on going forever because that weight is removed. The weight that made that difficult journey to get to the island was removed. It's off. When we enter our eternal state, right, when we enter into glory, what is described in Revelation chapter 21 and 22 is helping us to understand the weight that is making this life difficult, it's ultimately removed so that we could actually live in glory to our original design. We're given our eternal bodies, and we are living in this environment that is perfect, where the instigator of sin is removed. There is more that takes place, and we're going to be talking about this in a few minutes, but I want to start kind of navigating to a different aspect of eternity that most of us often contemplate. Because when it comes to heaven or eternity, as we're going to be talking about, most people have an idea of what they are looking forward to that, to be honest, is unbiblical. It's not found in the Bible. And as we get into our eternal state, most people, their greatest anticipation in getting there is being able to be reconciled to loved ones that have passed away, right? That's our biggest anticipation. And I want to clarify that there is nothing wrong with desiring to be reunited eternally with individuals who we loved and cared for. And I'm going to come back and elaborate on that in just a second. But as we have seen over and over again throughout this unveiling of what's taking place in heaven's activity, you have to understand, and I know that this is difficult for us because what we're seeing is what we're anticipating from our point of view, but you have to understand what the book of Revelation is doing. It's revealing what's actually going to happen in eternity. And the focal point of eternity, I know this is going to sound offensive, and it's offensive to everyone. It should be offensive to me from this point of view, but it's not your deceased relatives. It is the Lamb. That's the whole focal point. The greatest aspect of the redemption story, which is what the Bible's recording, we're going to talk about that at the end. The greatest aspect of the redemption story is that it's restoring what was lost from the original design. There is no greater loss that was experienced at the moment of the fall than having direct access and a close community with God, being in close fellowship with God. That is the most crucial, difficult loss that we experienced. As I already stated, the first 3 chapters of Genesis is helping us to understand God's original design. And the book of Revelation, at the end, is unveiling the design being restored back to its original intent. That's the entire Bible. In Genesis chapter 3, it records the fall of humanity. And in the midst of this fall, we get this incredible detail in verse 8 that helps us to understand what life in the garden was like. We don't get a lot of those details, but we do understand one detail that is extremely crucial there. So after the man and woman sin, they tried to cover themselves and they try to hide. This is what Genesis chapter 3, verse 8 states. It says, when the cool evening breezes were blowing, the man and his wife heard the Lord God walking about in the garden. Now, this is important. It's extremely important, actually. The Lord God was walking about in the garden where they were at. The reason that they're hiding from God is because they had direct access to God. We often think about God as unapproachable, which once again, in our broken state, no doubt, we're going to elaborate on that. But understand this, that what that's telling us is just as we're walking amongst each other's, God, the Lord, is walking amongst humanity. That's what the conditions of the garden were. They were in a close and intimate relationship with him. Do you understand why this by far is the greatest loss for humanity? After the fall, it says that man is removed not only from the garden, but we no longer have direct access to God. But I want you to think about that. The creator of all things was living amongst his creation. That's incredible. As we get to the final installment of the Bible, the book of Revelation, what we see is that the greatest loss for humanity is now restored. It's reversed. Revelation chapter 22, verse 3 and 4 brings us back to a reset of the garden. Starting with verse 3, it says, no longer will there be a curse upon anything, for the throne of God and the Lamb will be there, and his servants will worship him. And they will see his face, and his name will be written on their foreheads. This last week, I was talking to an individual about the mark of the beast, and I'm like, we often think about the mark of the beast as the greatest thing that we don't want to get without really understanding that we want the name of God written in our foreheads. We often emphasize the things that are temporal right here on earth when eternity has a name that we bear in our foreheads as well. And that's the name of God. And what we're seeing in these two verses is that the curse of sin that has affected everything, right? Because Romans says that even creation itself was subject to the curse. And creation is crying out to be restored to what it was. So creation, in these passages, it's helping us to understand, creation is restored to its original design, humanity is restored to its original intent, and that close community with God that was lost in the fall is now reinstated. Everything's reversed. To the point that not only are we identified as his, but there is this close, intimate relationship that is given, this description that is given. And it's those words, we will see his face. Let me try to elaborate on the significance of what that means, because we could read that verse and just simply go past it. This is helping us to understand the closeness of that relationship in a very personal level. For you to be able to be somebody, for you to be able to see someone face to face, you have to live in close community. You have to approach someone. This is again helping us to understand the reversal of our current state in our eternal condition. And I'll tell you why this is so important to understand, that when it talks about us being able to see God face to face. So throughout Scripture, throughout the Bible, we will often come across passages that not only helps us to understand the holiness of God, but it also helps us to understand the extent of our broken condition. It's helping us to understand both. And this is doing that. In multiple places, we will see that people who try to approach God would actually die if they actually would see him. Even the closest of prophets mentioned in the Bible were not able to see God. So one example because of the role that he played in obedience and penmanship of the Bible, one of the most important figures biblically is likely the person of Moses, right? He's an extremely important figure biblically. In Exodus chapter 33, verses 18 through 20, we read this request that Moses makes to Yahweh, to the Lord, to God. This is what the account says. Moses responded, "Then show me your glorious presence," right? He's asking God, then show me your presence. He wants to see him. And the Lord replied, "I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will call out my name, Yahweh, before you. For I will show mercy to anyone I choose, and I will show compassion to anyone I choose. But you may not look directly at my face, for no one may see me and live." Are you seeing the contrast? In our broken condition, we can't see God. Even Moses could not see God face to face. Here's this huge piece of information that something is changing drastically as we're entering into our eternal state. That now, what we could not do in our earthly bodies, we're able to do, and it's just normal. Because we're walking amongst God. When we think of our human state, we often don't think about how broken we are until we see passages like this. Because this is helping us to understand that God's presence has to be limited to us here on earth for two reasons. Because of who he is and because of who we are. It's just that simple. We can't take it in, or we would die. In light of this, it helps us to understand that we don't fully understand the holiness of God. We just simply don't. It is not until we understand that if we were to actually see God face to face right now, we would be on a coffin. Sin affects every aspect of life. So when everything is restored, not only is the greatest of all losses restored, which is being in intimate relationship with God, in closeness, but we see that our broken state is done away, and we are now with God without the fear of dying. We don't have to worry about dying because we're seeing God, because that's the original intent. Let that sink in for a second, because I think we often think about ourselves as good people. We often think of ourselves as, somebody that God would be absolutely marveled to just spend time with because we're absolutely phenomenal people. You would die, but everything's restored. So I want to come back to the greatest anticipation of eternity. And I know that I already alluded to this, but we often anticipate heaven where, our relatives we hope they will be. And we anticipate it as long as the people that we love are there, heaven might as well be absent of the Lamb. Now, we don't say that, right? Because that would be wrong, but we indirectly imply it. Because all that we look forward to is not spending eternity with Jesus, it's spending eternity with our family members. Once again, it's indirectly implied that ultimately it's about the family members, not about Jesus. So as difficult as this may be to accept, here is the truth. It is hard for us to comprehend, and I get that, especially in our current state. This will be offensive. It's not an apology, it's just simply a statement. This will be offensive. There will likely, it is guaranteed, that there will be people that you love in hell. But their company in hell would not make hell feel more heavenly. We often think that heaven would be at a loss without the people that we love. And it's such a difficult thing for us to reconcile. How can we rejoice in heaven when there might be loved ones who are in hell? That's a really difficult thing to accept. You understand how we shift our perspective of what eternity is about versus what we anticipate? A cultural view of heaven in contrast to what the Bible describes of heaven? because the focal point of heaven is the one who sits on the throne and who is now making his home among his people. Revelation 21, verse 3, this is how John puts it. I heard a loud voice, sorry, it's not up on the screen. I heard a loud shout from the throne saying, "Look, God's home is now among his people. He will live with them, and they will be his people. God himself will be with them." God is with us. He's the focal point. Now, it doesn't mean that the relationships in heaven don't matter. That's not what I'm saying. But that's not the greatest thing that we gain. And one of the things that's interesting is God walks and lives among his people, and that's this other detail. Since God lives among his people, Revelation chapter 21, verse 22, John states that he actually sees no temple in the city, which we're going to talk about in just a second, for the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. There's no church, or there's no church building. Why? Because God is there. I mean, think about that for a second. I'm a very curious person that has many questions. I mean, everything will be made known. We have no need for a temple because God is among his people. And over, again, we're getting this clear description of that closeness and intimacy that is being restored at the moment of eternity, when we enter eternity. There is no separation. We are able to fully know him and be with him. That, if you're a believer, right, if that's what you consider yourself, that should leave you in awe and anticipation of what is to come. Because that's what heaven is about. I saw somebody share this yesterday on Instagram, and it was really interesting. They said, most people anticipate heaven when they actually don't even care to spend time with Jesus here on earth. That's harsh truth, but that's truth. Right? Why would we anticipate heaven if it's not even about Jesus? And that's the extent of what the Bible is describing. One interesting part about this eternal state is what the following verse 23, states, where it says that in this city that we're closing with, and that's how we're going to wrap it up, in this city, there is no need for a sun or a moon, for the glory of God illuminates the city, and it's its light. The Lamb is the light of the city. Now, I'm going to digress for a second. I'm going to move away for just a little bit from what we're talking about because this is extremely important. I love apologetics. Apologetics is being able to reasonably defend your faith with the Bible and be able to explain things that maybe are difficult for others to understand. So I want to tackle this topic really quickly. It's not going to take very long. But one of the things that we get in Genesis, in the first chapter, is this outline of creation events, right? Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. And some skeptics of Christianity have pointed out that there's a problem with the creation account in this way. Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through 5 records that God creates light on day 1. But then, as you continue to read, Genesis chapter 1, verses 14 through 19 record the lights in the sky, the sun, the moon, the stars, are not being created until day 4, which presents a question. Where's the source of light on day 1? Revelation is helping us to understand why there's no need for moon, stars, or sun in the city that is eternal, because the source of light is God. And light permeates the darkness. When God speaks, there is no need for a substance because he is the source of light. Let there be light. Revelation chapter 21 and verse 23, chapter 21, verse 23 is helping us to understand that creation account detail that most people fail to understand. So now going back to the restoration of our relationship with God, Revelation chapter 21, verse 4 unveils another detail of how close we are to God. And once again, as a believer, this should honestly excite you. And I get it. There's so many things in the broken nature that we anticipate and we look forward to that are not the most important things, but this is helping us to understand how broken we are. A significant detail that is given is this picture that depicts this layer of care and nurturing. This is what it says. Chapter 21, verse 4. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there will be no more death or sorrow or crying or pain. All these things are gone forever. I want you to just for a second try to visualize this, right? Just for a second, visualize this. What the Bible is trying to help us understand is it's trying to move us from our current experiences, from our daily understandings, from our daily motions of going through life. And it's trying to help us understand that's not the way that it was designed. And what this verse is helping us to see is, I have 6 kids, and seeing any of them cry is difficult. And here you get this picture, and this is the best picture that I could possibly imagine, in my mind is, here's the Father, here's God. And he's among his people, and it's a dad that is caring for his children. It's this intimate care and nurture that he doesn't like to see his children hurt. And he's wiping every tear from their eyes. Do you understand the closeness and the visualization that we're giving here, that is given here? That there is this relationship with God that has been lost, and we often take it for granted, but it's telling us here, once again, there's this expectation of what we see in eternity that is cultural, that is from a human desire, and then there are expectations that we should have from a biblical understanding of what heaven will be like. And once again, we have these expectations that our family will be what makes heaven enjoyable. And we often think that a loved one's absence in heaven would make eternity unbearable. But here's a couple of details that helps us to understand heaven in a greater way. It's not about your loved ones. And there's this closeness with God, that pain and suffering go away. Once again, everything that we're experiencing is reality to us, no doubt. Everything that we're created for is ultimately what is being restored. Not only is eternity absent of sin and more, which we're getting to, but it is an environment that is absent of all the negative emotions that drain us of joy in life. Right? It mentions it right there. There will be no more sorrow, no more crying, no more pain. That's what makes life unbearable. The curse of sin over our bodies and emotions is broken. While God designed all the emotions, we experience them in a broken way. I'll give you one example really quick. So when we think about anger, James, in the book of James, it says, anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. So we understand that anger is not something pleasing. As a matter of fact, anger is a very bad thing that can lead to other things. Whether if you hate your brother, which is anger, you're guilty of murder, right? Anger is not seen as a good attribute. However, when we go to the time of Jesus' time here on earth, or when we go to the records of Jesus' time here on earth, it says that when he entered the temple and he saw that they were selling these things and had made it a marketplace for sacrifices, he was angry and he overturned the tables. What's the difference? In our eternal state, we still experience all the emotions, but we experience them perfectly. What Jesus experienced was holy anger because of what people were doing based on sin. We get angry based on sin, and ultimately we sin a little bit further. So once again, when we enter our eternal state, those things are still intact. It's not like we're robots that don't feel any emotion, but we're no longer experiencing the things that drain us of joy. And it's easy, once again, to compartmentalize the things in how we see them from our current state. And this is helping us to understand, the greatest restoration of everything that was broken is God's original design and purpose of being in heaven with him. God is the focal point, and once again, that's the greatest victory. So heaven is absent from everything that is intrusive, and he becomes our source of comfort. Now, understanding this, and I get it, once again, we don't always see it that way, and we might not even see it like that all the time, but maybe it helps us to reconsider. Okay, the first thing in heaven is Jesus, but then comes family, right? Family's second. Let's go back really quick to what's being restored. From our daily experiences of loss and death and relationships that are affected by sin, I definitely understand how seeing family is at the top of the list. I'm not here to change your mind. I'm not here to tell you how you should feel otherwise. But I believe that the greatest thing that the book of Revelation does is it's helping us to fix our perspective from the here and now to eternity. And I believe that what we as believers will greatly anticipate is the fact that we are freed from the curse of sin by the elimination of the deceiver. We're going to have this gift of an eternal body. The greatest restoration is living eternally with God, and the elimination of sin over our lives, which affects our decisions, impacts our lives, or those that live around us. This entire understanding that sin is done with, that should be in and of itself number two. And I'll tell you why. This last week, it was a difficult week. I'm not going to lie. It was one of those weeks where you kind of struggle. You're struggling as you're moving into the Christmas season. And maybe you found yourself there before, but sometimes I find myself struggling with sin, and other times I find myself struggling with the consequences and the aftermath of the sin that I have engaged in. Right? So there's two different types of struggles. And one hard aspect of life, and this is the reason that being eternally with God, number one, and I believe that number two is sin is broken. We honestly have to say that's number two, that's gone. I love how Paul actually summarizes in Romans chapter 7. He talks about how, and this is the daily struggles. When people go to church and they think that now they're, in a position where they can't sin anymore, they're lying. Even Paul says in chapter 7, the things that I want to do, I don't do. The things that I should do, the things that I shouldn't do, I do. And he's talking about this wrestling of the flesh and the spirit. And that's a struggle. And this last week I was struggling. Once again, it could be based on sin, but it could also be based on the aftermath of sin. And it was definitely on the aftermath of sin. So as I was preparing for the message, I'm studying this foreshadowing or this revelation of everything's to come. And as I'm studying the aspects of what eternity entails, this has to be number two. It made me anticipate it even more. And it's not, and I think that most people anticipate heaven because of the alternative for it, right? I don't want to go to HE double hockey sticks, I don't want to go there. But I don't anticipate it for that reason. As I was studying it, I anticipated for one because of community restored with God, but two is because the curse of sin is broken. Because I know my struggles. And I know how my struggles have affected others. And in Romans chapter 7, verse 24, I think this can come out of my mouth. It could come out of yours. Paul puts it this way in regards to our daily struggles and with sin. He says, "Oh, what a miserable person I am. Who will free me from this life that is dominated by sin and death?" Right? This is our daily occurrence. We're miserable people who make other people miserable by our own misery. And Revelation is helping us to understand, here's the moment where everything is broken so that you are freed from the mystery that you bring upon yourself and you put others through. That has to be number two. That we're freed from the very essence of who we are. That we know that sin is going to cause damage to someone else, but we engage in it anyways. And we're freed from bondage of sin when we come into Christ, no doubt about it. This is the frustrating part. The struggle continues. Because there's this desire to do what God is calling us to do, but there's also this desire to do what we know is going to bring us some little pleasure, some fleeting pleasure. In our eternal state, not only will there be void of sin and dominion over us, but as Paul addresses, the grave and death are no longer. That has been removed from the picture. 2 weeks ago, we talked about the day of judgment. Death and the grave were thrown into the lake of fire. That lake is a fire is a second death. So this second death is absolute, meaning that death is abolished. Grave and the death are no longer part of the human existence. The entire message that the church believes and preaches is captured in these 2 chapters. So let me break it down to you, and I'm going to try to do it in a few verses so that you can understand what we are to be preaching. The origin and the design of humanity is different from our current state and condition. What we're experiencing right now is not what God intended. There are things that feel intrusive, and they feel intrusive because they were not part of the design, like death, sin, chaos, all those things were not part of what God designed. This is all traced back to sin that was brought in and brought in a couple of things: separation from God and spiritual and physical death. Spiritual death is what yields to sin, right? So there's an inclination to do what is evil. And physical death is what causes the sting. We don't like it. We hate it. In our broken condition, we are unable to undo what was done, which is the reason that 2,000 years ago, Jesus came as a baby, which we're talking about next week for our Christmas Eve service. Here's the invite, 5 p.m. And the reason that he comes in is to restore what is broken. Here's the message. As much as it may insult you, and I really don't care, we are all broken. No one is good. No one is justified on their own actions. It can only be done by the saving grace of Jesus Christ. We are all in desperate need of being saved from what lies ahead. Jesus already did that. Revelation is helping us to understand the caution sign ahead. Everything that is recorded between Genesis and Revelation is helping us to see the extent of our brokenness, right? It's recording the story of people in history that ultimately were broken, but by faith, they acted upon what God was commanding them to do. God's redemption plan is foretold and is unfolding, and every single verse from the Old Testament is pointing us to Jesus. Everything now is pointing us back to Jesus and the beginning, the origin, and the restoration of things. Do you understand that this is all parallel? If somebody's preaching something other than that you could be good enough to get to heaven, that you could do works that can outdo the bad ones, somebody's selling you something. Because we are saved by grace alone. What we're seeing over and over in the Bible is this parallel and this shadow of the things to come. We see the people of Israel in the Old Testament that foreshadow God's people, right? Who God is in relationship with. We see a city called Jerusalem. Chapter 21 of Revelation talks about a new Jerusalem. I haven't been avoiding, that's what the entire chapter is about in verse 21, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. I know that sometimes we get so fixated by the details that we fail to actually understand the bigger picture. That's really what I'm going to do with the New Jerusalem. So the city of Jerusalem, biblically, has always been referred to as the geographical location that exists here on earth in Israel. And that place is the place where God met his people. It's God's dwelling place. That's the way that it's seen, and that's the way it's captured. The New Jerusalem is the greatest updated iOS version of Jerusalem because it's free of sin, it's free of chaos, it's free of death, it's better. That's what it's telling us. The current Jerusalem, if you were to go there, it's like any other city on earth. It's broken, it has broken conditions. The New Jerusalem will not. That's the biggest difference. Now, when we get this description of the New Jerusalem, there's It's significant because we have to understand what it means, and some of it is intended to be literal, some of it is intended to be symbolic. And it doesn't really matter. The first detail is the shape of the city. It's disputed whether it's a square or whether it's a pyramid, a triangle. And again, that's not the focal point. We're simply getting dimensions. We have no idea what the shape is like. And the geometry of it doesn't really matter. But in John chapter 14, verse 1 through 4, Jesus gives a word of encouragement to believers and then speaks of this place that is mentioned here in Revelation. He says this, "Don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God and trust also in me. There is more than enough room in my Father's home. If it were not so, would I have told you that I am going to prepare a place for you? When everything is ready," and here's the return of Jesus, "I will come and get you so that you will be with me where I am. And you know the way to where I am going." Why? Because he is the way, the truth, and the life. So what Jesus is talking about is a foreshadowing of what Revelation is describing. So here we come to this perfect place where there's no crime, there's no death, there's no decay, and God's making his home among his people that bear his name, right? We've already talked about all this. And that's the reason it's important to understand all that before you get to the actual city. The city is described to have a length, width, and height of 1,400 miles. It's a big city. Nice. I have it on, city, Siri, I get it. Okay. That's what it was. It was that thing. But, okay, just to give you a perspective, right? A geographical perspective of how big this city is. If you were to drive in a straight line, no curves, no nothing, just drive straight from Wadena, Minnesota to the city that I grew up in Brownsville, Texas, you would just be a few miles over from 1,400 miles. That's how big the city is, right? And that's just in one direction. 1,400 miles in each direction. So that's the base. 1,400 miles in width, length, and then it says that it's 1,400 miles up. That's a big city. And estimated to sustain billions and billions and billions of people. Now, important thing to note is that, as stated many times, not everybody that claims to be a Christian is going to go to heaven. Jesus actually says, I believe it's in Matthew chapter 7, in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, "Not everybody that calls out to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom. Only those who actually obey my law," right? So there's a very big difference between those who claim and those who are. So this new Jerusalem is for the people that are in Christ. Now, this place is not going to just house the believers as Jesus returns. It's everybody from the moment of creation to the return of Christ. A lot of people. Now, the following detail that we get here is that the wall measures 216 feet thick. That's how big or thick it is. Now, this is what is being disclosed so far. It is a strong city that cannot be overtaken. It is strong, and it will fit many people who have placed their hope and trust in Jesus. Revelation chapter 21, verse 11 states that the city shone with the glory of God and sparkled like a precious stone, like jasper, as clear as crystal. This is important because we already talked about it, right? God is making his home among his people, and he is the source of light. There's no need for moon. There's no need for stars or sun. So going back to Revelation chapter 4, verse 3, we're going back now, it stated that the one sitting on the throne was as brilliant as gemstones, like jasper and carnelian, and there was a glow of an emerald that circled his throne like a rainbow, right? Here's the radiance of God that is filling this city. That's what it's telling us. Once again, God is the one who gives light to the city. His glory fills it. Revelation chapter 21, verse 12 says that the names of the 12 tribes of Israel were written on the gates. And Revelation chapter 21, verse 19 tells us that the wall of the city was built on foundation stones inlaid with 12 precious stones. This is important. It's symbolic. It's highly symbolic. The stones that are mentioned in there, and if you want to, you could go and study it. The stones that are mentioned in the book of Revelation are the same stones that are mentioned for the breastplate of the priests that represented the 12 tribes of Israel, which we talked about in this series. Once again, everything's tying together. Old Testament, 12 tribes, and then as we fast forward, Revelation chapter 21, verse 14, we get another 12, and it says this: the wall of the city had 12 foundation stones, and on them were written the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. Old Testament, New Testament. What is it telling us? Here is a city that hosts Old Testament, New Testament believers. It is all God's people. That's what it's telling us. Once again, that's a foundation of God's people. Do you understand the symbolism and how we could get so wrapped up in the details, trying to picture this city with gold streets and all these things? Understand its symbolic meaning, because that's what's going to give you the most depth. So the 12 tribes, once again, Old Testament, 12 disciples, New Testament. Now, in regards to who's going to be there, like I said, it's going to be believers from both aspects, from Old Testament and New Testament. Hebrews chapter 12 also indicates that there will be countless thousands of angels that are there for the joyful gathering, right? It's this Christian party. It's going to be great. And while there are gates in the city, which are described, the gates are never closed. It's kind of ironic, have gates for what reason? As a matter of fact, they're always open. But Revelation chapter 21, verse 27 says that nothing evil will ever be allowed to enter, nor anyone who practices shameful idolatry and dishonesty, but those whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life. So understand that the gospel is open to everyone. Those that are outside of it are those who refuse to repent. So sin is done away with, right? This is the eternal condition. Verse 21 gives a description of what these gates are made out of. And this is really cool, really interesting. I'm just about done. The 12 gates were made of pearls, each gate from a single pearl. Now, this is really cool, and this is the reason that I wanted to talk about this. Now, whether this is to be taken literally or not, right, if we're going to walk into this building with like giant pearly gates, we're not sure. But here's something really interesting. This is true. So what you're seeing right now is actually known as the sleeping lion. And one source stated that in 2018, that was the world's largest pearl known to man. And it actually sold in the Netherlands at auction for $374,000 to a Japanese trader. Now, this is the reason that it's important, right? So here we have this massive city, 1,400 miles, and each way up, down, sideways, whatever. The gate has to be huge, right? And it says that it's made out of one piece of pearl. It's a single pearl. It's not like it's put together. It's one piece. This was sold for $374,000, and here is how much it weighed. 5.4 ounces, and it was 2.75 inches long. This is what we base our worth on, right? This is what we go after. It's all about money. It's all about what we can acquire. It's all about these things. And here you get to the New Jerusalem, and here's one giant piece of pearl that completely outdoes this. Now, it's doubtful that for such a massive city that has 12 gates, that the entrance is going to be 3 inches tall. It's really doubtful. I don't think this is the biggest one, right? What this is helping us to understand is that all the things in the ancient world, in the Old Testament, and all the things even now that we consider valuable as gold and silver, all these things, while there is beauty in them, we spend our entire life trying to acquire more of this, when in heaven, that's just simply what radiates beauty, and it's outdone in a second. Do you understand that the eternal state... You could come with this and try to sell. There was an episode on The Twilight Zone of a couple of guys that end up like, I think it's cryogenesis, where they freeze themselves, but they steal a bank and they freeze themselves only to come out years later, and they're dying because they're in the desert. Somebody took their vehicle, and as they're walking, all of them have died because they're dying of dehydration. Finally, one guy is like trying to hoard all the gold because he's going to be rich as soon as he gets to a city. And he ends up dying or falling to the ground. And there's this guy that comes in and he's like, do you need help? And he's like, I'll give you a bar of gold if you just give me some water, And he ends up dying. And the guy comes, this is in the future. And he comes to his wife and he's like, this is the weirdest thing. This guy was offering me a bar of gold for some water. Like, he almost acted like it meant something. And here, every vehicle in the future is made out of gold, right? And that kind of shows us that everything that we're dying for is just petty, ridiculous. Everything can be outweighed and undone in heaven quickly. So regardless of what aspects, we can conclude that the New Jerusalem is figurative and literal. The New Jerusalem, regardless of it, is not symbolic. It is a literal location where believers will be. What details are literal, what details are symbolic, it's irrelevant, but there's significance in everything. So Revelation chapter 21, verse 2 says that the holy city in this New Jerusalem is coming down from God out of heaven like this beautiful, this bride, beautifully dressed bride for her husband. And this is where a lot of skeptics kind of frown upon it, right? The sheer size of this, I mean, it's huge, right? And it would be like seeing the Death Star come into Earth, right? It's like, how is that even possible? And I said it because I have Darth Vader. But some are doubtful that this could even happen because of the size of it. But here's a couple of things to consider. The Bible describes things that seem unique or impossible, but here's the two things that you have to keep in mind. There is no impossible for God. And second, the things that seemed impossible, even maybe improbable back then, have proven not to be so far off now. We talked about how the entire world, biblically it says that the entire world will be able to see the return of Christ and witness it simultaneously. We understand that this is possible through social media, FaceTime, the news broadcast stations, right? I mean, imagine writing that back then. That would seem impossible. How can everybody from different places of the world actually see the return of Christ? It's possible now. Now, this city seems to be almost impossible. It seems something straight out of science fiction. It doesn't seem like reality. And this is what I want to wrap it up with. I think it's extremely intriguing. So check this video out. It's 2 minutes long.
For too long, humanity has existed within dysfunctional and polluted cities that ignore nature. Now, a revolution in civilization is taking place. Imagine a traditional city and consolidating its footprint, designing to protect and enhance nature. The line will be home to 9 million residents and will be built with a footprint of just 34 square kilometers. And we are designing it to provide a healthier, more sustainable quality of life. The line's communities are organized in 3 dimensions. Residents have access to all their daily needs within 5-minute walk neighborhoods. And the line's infrastructure makes it possible to travel end-to-end in 20 minutes with no need for cars, resulting in 0 carbon emissions. By leveraging AI technology, services are autonomous, saving you time and effort. Designed by world-leading architects, the line is 500 meters tall, 200 meters wide, 170 kilometers long, and housed within an elegant mirror glass facade. Intelligent solutions create efficiency and year-round temperate microclimate with natural ventilation. Energy and water supplies are 100% renewable. The line is designed as a series of unique communities, offering a wealth of amenities, providing equitable views and immediate access to the surrounding nature. With 40% of the world accessible within 6 hours, at the heart of the globe's key trade routes, a place for commerce and communities to thrive like nothing on earth seen before. The Line, the city that delivers new wonders for the world.
Once again, there's things that we understand biblically that seem really weird, really far off, but we understand that there's an issue. Here's this mock trial of what Revelation is describing, this city. And it sounds crazy, right? That we actually are trying to do something similar. The difference between Inline and the New Jerusalem is that the city of Jerusalem, New Jerusalem, is built for its inhabitants, not the other way around for people to come and outgrow. It will be sustainable. I actually watched a 45-minute video or documentary about what drove them to make this design. And you heard it in the video, but one of the biggest issues was that they know that there is an issue with society, from crime to chaos and all these other issues that are happening. We understand that society has an issue. You don't have to be a Christian to understand that. The problem is that As selective as one could be as to who's going to live in that community or not, the problem is brought in as soon as you bring in broken people, because it's sin. The New Jerusalem addresses the issue that yields the perfect conditions. Sin is eliminated, death is no more, and God is among his people. The storyline finishes with the address of the original issue, which is sin. Humanity is restored, death is no more. And while we as a church can spend a lot of time, hours trying to figure out how close we are to Jesus' return and the meaning of the details that are leading up to it, here's the point. And this is, we're wrapping it up. I know I went longer, but this is the conclusion of the book of Revelation, which is extremely, there's a lot of different details that need to be tackled. The way that the book of Revelation finishes is this way. It tells us to live ready. That's the point. And here's the two ways to look at it. Live like he is coming back any day, or live like today could be your last. Because whether he returns in our lifetime or not, the reality is we will either all be standing before God to be judged, before Christ to be judged, or be restored back to God's original design. Let's pray.